and is being live streamed on LinkedIn. In the back half of the hour, we will have breakout rooms for each speaker where you'll be able to ask any questions directly to them. And you'll be able to choose which speaker's room to join and be able to move between the rooms. Just a heads up for those of you participating, via viewing on LinkedIn, we won't be live streaming the breakout room portion. So just a heads up, if you do want to ask questions directly of the speakers or participate in the breakout rooms, just a reminder to sign on via Zoom. And we're going to try to keep an eye on the time, but we have really great content and speakers. So with such great content, the meeting might go a little bit long. And just a final reminder that we will send out the presentation and slides after the event. And to get started, I think we have a poll question for you all, just to track why you are in attendance today and the topics you're most interested in. And while you're answering that poll question, I'm going to get started with a little introduction. So as you all know, today we're here to discuss clean transportation and what programs and incentives are available to support your transportation electrification initiatives. And as you all may be aware, California has set very aggressive targets for clean transportation in the state. Specifically, California has an objective to have 5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030 and 250,000 electric vehicle charging stations by 2025. And further, by 2035, all new cars and passenger trucks sold in California must be zero emission vehicles. And so those are vehicles that don't emit any greenhouse gases or air pollutants from their tailpipes, and include battery plug-in electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. And we know that meeting these clean transportation targets is a crucial step in California meeting its air quality and climate change targets, as the transportation sector contributes about 50% of the state's GHG emissions, nearly 80% of nitrogen oxide pollution, and 90% of diesel particulate matter pollution. And just for reference, we have currently just over 1 million zero emission vehicles on the road in California and only 79,000 EV chargers. So while those state targets are really great drivers of change, and we're super excited to work towards meeting those objectives, it's also clear that we have a ton of work to do in building out infrastructure, so there's more access to EV charging, and encouraging and incentivizing drivers to make the switch, and that we need to be looking for creative solutions, partnerships, and financing to overcome any barriers to EV adoption and EV infrastructure build out if we want to reach the objective of 5 million EVs on the road and 250,000 chargers by the stated timelines. And luckily for all of us, we have a really fantastic panel with us today who will share with all of us what they're up to in the TE space and how they're working on the clean transformation, and they're going to share their experiences before we head off to those breakout rooms and we can ask questions of them. We'll hear from Danae Evans, Transportation Services Project Manager with the City of Richmond, on developing and operating EV chargers for employees, the public, and fleet. Juan Moreno Jr., Facilities Manager for Rutherford Hill Winery, on the challenges and ultimate success of installing EV charging ports. Matt Velasco, Director of Maintenance, Operations, and Transportation at Pittsburgh Unified School District, on their electric bus fleet. And finally, we'll hear from Brett Wiley, MCE's EV Program Manager, on MCE's programs. And for a little bit of additional context, for MCE, clean transportation is a priority in 2022. We're really ready to do our part to help the state achieve its goals and help our communities with a just and equitable transition away from fossil fueled transportation, which contributes to climate change. Currently, our programs are being self-funded through generation funds, but despite that, we have more than 1,250 level 2 ports either installed or committed, and that represents over half of all public level 2 charging ports in our 4 counties. And as Brett will talk about, we also have some EV rebates for low income customers, and that those go up to $3,500 per vehicle, and when stacked with other available incentives, add up to as much as $14,500 in total incentives. And one thing that's really exciting for us, and probably for all of you as well, is the new funding opportunities that are available or expected to come available soon as a result of federal and state budget allocations. At the federal level, last year, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed, which contains significant new funding for EV charging stations. And based on a formula approach, California is estimated to receive about $40 billion of those funds. And the governor's 2022 to 2023 budget invest an additional 6.1 billion over 5 years for zero emission vehicle acceleration, with a focus on communities that are most impacted by climate change. And so MCE is actively monitoring these state and federal funding opportunities, and with the hopes that we can access some funds and build out TE infrastructure like charging stations in our communities. And we're also closely monitoring the legislative session for opportunities to support bills that would help California's TE goals. In particular, something that we're excited about, we're supporting AB 1814, which is a bill being sponsored by MCE Assemblymember Grayson, which would give CCAs access to the same pot of CPUC funding as the IOUs have access to. And so this would, put CCAs on equal footing with the IOUs in terms of access to TE funding, and that would allow us to, continue to partner with our communities. And on the regulatory side, we're trying to get access to those same ratepayer funds, and we're also looking to get increased access to low carbon fuel standard credits so we could increase our TE program offerings. And since MCE's formation, we've worked hard to eliminate emissions across our portfolio so that we can do our part to slow the pace of climate change. And we're always looking for additional ways our programs can meet the evolving needs of our customers and communities. And so with all that background in mind, I think we'll kick it off now and turn it over to our panel of experts. And first up, we have Danae Evans, Transportation Services Project Manager with the City of Richmond.
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you for having me today. As Sabrina mentioned, I am the Transportation Services Project Manager. That's my title, but I do a number of things. And the reason why I'm going to share this is because it allows me to get more charging stations in the ground. My other duties, I'm actively the City Parking Authority, and I also manage transportation demand management in the city. So not only am I able to install infrastructure, I have the authority to put it in lots and on public parking stalls. Next slide, please. So basically, in developing and operating EV chargers for the employees and public fleet, first we had to overcome a few internal challenges. Next slide, please. Initially, we experienced a lack of administrative management support to allow EV charging stations in Richmond in general. Anything over 1 or 2 stations was looked upon negatively by a former planning director. I will not mention names to protect the innocent, but ultimately what occurred is in my attempt to get charging stations to the city of Richmond, I heard of Tesla actually offering to install stations in Richmond. And when I presented their offer to all the different departments in the management, our planning director felt that EV charging stations in the public right of way, in city parking lots, park parking lots were the equivalent of gas stations. And furthermore, our existing ordinances didn't support installing charging stations in those areas. Fortunately, in my communication with Tesla, I was new to EV charging in sustainable transportation, and they pointed out AB 1236. And once I started doing a little bit of research, I found that the city of Richmond was not in compliance with AB 1236. So that was one of the challenges that we had to overcome. The second challenge that was really an issue is budget and staff constraints. Constraints were limiting the city's ability to obtain and install new stations and upgrade existing equipment. At the time, when I initially joined the city of Richmond in 2016, we had 3 charging stations. Today, we have about 18 city-owned stations, and through other arrangements, we have an additional 10 stations that are operated in conjunction with the city. But trying to get to those numbers were a challenge because of budget funding, and I'm going to share some of the strategies we use to get around that. And then lastly, we had inadequate and outdated facilities. So the city of Richmond has a lot of parking lots and facilities. However, they were not EV ready or even EV capable at that time. And as anyone knows who's trying to implement infrastructure, especially public infrastructure, labor costs and construction costs are the biggest piece, the heavy lifting of the budgeting for getting these units in the ground. Next slide, please. So the first approach that we did, that we took to address the lack of administrative support is we jumped headfirst into complying with AB 1236, which basically requires all municipalities to adopt an ordinance to streamline EV permit process. Prior to adopting this ordinance, two things were happening. It was becoming an administrative, I'm sorry, if you were to apply for an EV charging station, you had to go through the planning and design process. Now it is a over-the-counter administrative process through the building department, and it's streamlined. So the result of this strategy was it created a checklist for any contractor that was interested in submitting a plan for approval, so they knew exactly what was needed. Prior to that, many cities had different steps that contractors had to meet to get approvals, and they weren't aligned. And so this really helped them to know firsthand what they needed and to prepare them. Plans could then be submitted electronically. Now, a lot of the cities that I've spoken to that haven't adopted 1236, they claim that this is an issue, the electronic submittals. And sometimes you think that it has to be like an active link or something, but the minimum requirement is that you should be able to at least submit the plans via email or Google Docs or whatever format you have, but you can send it via email. And so that's what we are using to accept submittals. And then lastly, all EV charging station projects are reviewed in a timely fashion, which was a big relief to a lot of public and private entities. And what I didn't add to this slide, which is kind of, and I guess it's a coincidental result of this, is that I unofficially became like a liaison for any public or private entity that's interested in submitting plans to the city. And if there are any issues that delay the plan or the program, then they reach out to me and I help. I also sit in on the initial meetings, the plan check meetings, to discuss the design and any challenges. Next slide, please. So after we adopted 1236, then the charging stations came. We were able to have Tesla on the right. You'll see they have you can't see all of the stations, but they have 20 stations at the Pacific East Mall, which is right off of 580, 680, the 80, sorry, the 80. And also what I couldn't get on this is we have another Tesla station that is on private property at the Harbor Gate Shopping Center in the Marina area. And I was able to negotiate with them 2 level 2 chargers for those who don't own Teslas. And furthermore, they're free for public use. I'm not allowed to announce that or to advertise it, but if someone asks me, I'll point it out. And for us, that is killing 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, because it allows for low-income individuals to use charging stations in the Marina area. And also, it opened up the gateway for us to also have the solar charging arc, which you see on the right, which is 100% resilient, and it is in the Marina parking lot. So what I forgot to mention is when I received the council approval, when we adopted 1236, AB 1236, I also mentioned that the governor had recently adopted AB 1083, which allowed EV charging stations in state parks and beaches. And so we were able to also incorporate that into our ordinance adoption. Next slide, please. So for the second challenge, which is the budget and staff constraints, one of the things that really helped in the city of Richmond, and I'm only speaking about the strategies that we use that helped us, was to hold annual National Drive electric events to educate the public on our incentives and programs, and also to increase familiarity with electric vehicles, and also to gain community support. Our National Drive electric events were always held right in front of City Hall, so you couldn't miss it. I always had it on a day close to council meeting or special sessions so that they could see that I was bringing in electric autonomous vehicles. We also were able to gather public utility companies. MCE was there, PG&E was there. We had community organizations as CHDC that would come and share how to purchase vehicles, how to stack rebates. And this, having it on campus, also encouraged city employees to test drive the vehicles, to hear directly from the vehicle owners, and to learn what the incentive programs were that would allow them to purchase vehicles. Additionally, from an employee standpoint, the city of Richmond allows employees to charge free 4 hours a day at any of the ChargePoint charging stations. And there's a reason that it's just ChargePoint, is because ChargePoint is a little bit easier to program for that purpose. The second action we did to address the budget and staff constraints is we had to consider alternative means to fund EV station projects. And the means that we used were to leverage existing partnerships and seek new partnerships for sharing the cost and the burden of management of these units. We applied for local grant funding. We always, no matter what the grant was, if you're applying for a mobility grant or some type of street improvement grant, I always would add language in there asking for money to cover a few electric vehicle charging stations. And also, this is what I use in many of the grant projects that we have right now. And my go-to is always the Air District. We have several iterations of the charge grant that have funded our charging stations. And then MCE, thankfully, in the rebate program, we are able to use that to help cover some of the labor costs that are not covered in the Air District grants or other grants, to help us do the installation and cover labor. And then lastly, if you aren't aware of it, 511 Contra Costa has charging stations that are available to public entities, even private individuals. If you're interested in using their stations and their funding, all you have to do is just contact them and tell them where the location is, and then go through a really easy approval process to help cover that cost. And then lastly, like I said, I sought new public-private partnerships, specifically with EVgo and Volta. And the beauty of it was that EVgo has their own funding through the PUCs, and they were able to cover the expense of not only upgrading our existing outdated infrastructure, but also they brought in their own equipment, they manage it, and they pay a small stipend, because part of the partnership was that the city was willing to give up or allow them to use public parking stalls. In this case, EVgo has 2 stations, 2 equal access stations in the city of Richmond within city parking stalls. And Volta is using 2 public stalls downtown. And what's great about Volta is they have a business platform where they use blue chip advertising to pay for their equipment. It's advertised on site, and that therefore allows the public to charge for free. So both of those projects probably totaled well over $2.5 million if the city were to use the general fund. But in this case, it didn't cost taxpayers $1. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go back to the drive electric events. Like I said, it's really important to have the drive electric events. To me, I didn't know how important it was until I started to see that after having events like you see on the left-hand side, the employees and even the community learn about financial incentives. I field calls probably weekly from the community and try to connect them. And that's our way of also encouraging them to transition to zero emission vehicles. And then as a result of that, then they're interested in installing EV charging stations at their home and their businesses. On the right, granted, I could have provided a better picture of our National Drive Electric event, but I wanted to show you two employees. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is one purchased a Tesla for a great amount of money. I'm not going to tell you where or how much. It was a great deal. After she stacked all the rebates from not only financing her vehicle, but also rebates provided from PG&E and MCE, and she went solar. And one of the things that the city of Richmond does is we highlight these employees with photos like this, and we have them share their story, and then they list their information like, hey, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Well, the lady on the left did reach out to her and found out all about the incentive programs, and the employee was able to help her colleague purchase a car from sharing her experience. And then add to it, they both use the city charging stations daily, free of charge for 4 hours. And mainly it's just to top off because, I mean, ultimately that's what they really need to. But also you can see they're parked right in front of our EVgo stations that are located at Civic Center. Next slide, please. So the last issue that we had to address was the inadequate, outdated facilities. I mentioned before that we did some partnerships, but prior to that, it's really important to conduct an inventory of all your parking supply in the city. Take note of what's available. Do you have existing transformers and infrastructure that you can readily install charging stations to? If not, what do you need to do? How much would that cost? And then also look for other opportunities to partner with private entities to install stations in their private lots as well to support stations. So with EVgo, we were able to get 8 DC fast chargers. We have 2 equal access charging hubs, and that is also the gateway that is going to allow us to launch our car share program, which is coming, our electric car share program that is coming next month. So it's kind of like that movie, if you build it, they will come. Well, when we started installing charging stations, I noticed that the floodgates, I wouldn't say the floodgates, but the gates of opportunity opened for us to qualify for other grant opportunities and mobility funding opportunities, such as an electric vehicle shuttle program. We were able to say that we have existing infrastructure to support an electric shuttle, and we will be launching the shuttle next month. Also, because we have existing infrastructure, then that also welcomes electric car share to come to the city. And so, like I said, if you build it, they will come. Partnering with Volta has really been great because it speaks to equitable charging. It's free charging. It's in the downtown area. It's highly visible. And again, it didn't cost the city any money. We just had to, agree to give up a few parking spaces and to maintain them. And it's been a very productive partnership. And then lastly, I serve as an advisor for companies considering EV hub installations within the city. And because we've conducted a comprehensive list of potential areas where charging stations can be installed, people come to me. I can direct them to private partners. I can direct them, as a city parking authority, I can say, well, if you're interested in installing on our public right of way, then let me know. And then I can spearhead that and get it to all the departments that need to weigh in on whether or not we want to install. And so it's been really a great experience to take this different approach, because as a small city, sometimes we weren't able to compete with larger cities for funding sources. But by stacking all these incentives, these rebates, and these grant funds, it's helped the city of Richmond to establish their infrastructure and to develop a nice plan for expanding it in the future. Next slide, please. Here's the photo on the left is a photo of Volta downtown, which also happens to be in front. That building is actually a BART building. The first floor is commercial property, so it is close to BART. And then on the left, again, is one of the charging hubs for EVgo. Next slide. So that pretty much sums it up. I decided to list a couple of resources. For instance, GoBiz. If you haven't adopted AB 1236 in your municipality, there is a guidebook online that can help you do that. And also I referenced the assembly bills that helped us to adopt local ordinances to streamline charging stations, and also my contact information. So if anything, just remember, leverage your existing partnerships, make new partnerships, create new partnerships, and then constantly seek grant funding. And don't forget to add language in there that allows you to receive charging stations. Thank you.
Thanks, Anae. I really appreciate you sharing your experience, and it's really impressive to hear all that the city of Richmond has been able to accomplish. And just a reminder to folks, we will have the breakout rooms later. So if you have any questions for Danae, just be sure to join her breakout room and you can ask her directly there. And next up, we have Juan Moreno Jr., Facilities Manager for Rutherford Hill Winery.
Here we go. Hello, everybody. How are you? Uh-oh. Where'd I go? Where'd I go?
We see you, Juan. You're good.
Okay, there we go. I lost the screen. Okay, hey, how you doing, everybody? Like I said, Juan Moreno Jr. with Rutherford Hill Winery, Facilities Manager. So a couple years back, MCE reached out to us that there were some incentives for installing charging stations at the our facility. And the owners here, To Auto Family, they're very big on sustainability and continuing efforts to move forward with anything we can do. So it's important for them and also for our employees here to start being part of that and installing some EV stations here. And customers too, where they would come and ask, hey, do you guys have an EV station? No, we don't have any yet. So it was really exciting to bring that forward with the family here and the owners, management, and the response was, yeah, let's go for it, let's do this. So I currently I didn't even own an EV charging EV car, but I was excited myself that we were moving forward with this. So granted, we figured, hey, we got them, we allocated some funds, we know we need power, we know we need charging stations, and we budgeted and went down to the county, blueprint in hand. And then we got there and said, hey, we need to address some ADA stuff. And so, that was kind of a surprise for us with the ADA. And so, kind of back to the drawing board, which we didn't have some of that funding. And, but the goal was to get some charging stations in here. So came back to the drawing board. We had to go back through the loops. We looked at our ADA. Everything was in compliance to, what we had previously. But now it just meant we had to do some additional things, and came back, talked to, management and said, hey, well, let's keep moving forward. Let's get this done. Got all that in. We took our blueprints down, and basically we submitted back in, was it 3/21? We started working with the county. And then finally we had final blueprints. Well, let me back up a little bit. We ended up we worked with ADA third party to help us out. And then we also had to hire a third party engineer to help us do some blueprints too, along with our electrician. But we went down to the county, 5/16 submitted, 2019 submitted blueprints. County then finally got back to us on June 21st, 2019. So then we had to keep looking at some other things we had to amend on there. So we ended up, kept involving the third parties, got everything resolved, kept moving forward, of course, added some numbers on there to our budget that we didn't incorporate. And then finally, county got back to us, let's see, 7 months. It took 7 months to get our permit. Of course, we had, I think COVID started at the time, so there was a little lack there, but finally by 12/10, 2019, we had our permit in hand. I'm sorry, in January of, January 2020, we got our permit. We started our project, kept moving forward. And then we ended up installing 2 stations, 2 port each. And we ended up going with ChargePoint for the reason that it gives us opportunity to be able to, we're talking about maybe charging to pay back some of that money that we spent for the charging stations. But currently we've left it, right now it's free to our consumer. And that way it does give you, it does allow for you to have more control over it too. So that, being said that, if we end up charging in the future, we could charge. And if we, basically our club members, we'd give them a code and then they can end up charging here for free. Vendors, of course, that would come visit us, we give them a code, they can end up charging for free. And our employees can charge for free. The exciting part too about this was once we put in the charging stations, we ended up having 4 employees ended up moving forward and bought EV vehicles. So, that was great, just kind of, it just starts getting people, to start doing things like that. So it's, just really exciting. But the process, it wasn't mainstream at the time, but, I don't know how it is now. So it just made it a little bit more difficult, going through the hoops and doing all of that. And, so that made it, it kind of like you're moving forward and you're like, oh, and then you have to stop again. And so, but the great news was that the owners continue to, support us and we moved forward and got everything done. One thing too that we ended up doing, that ended up in the plan was I maxed out whatever I could for future stations. So currently, got a big transformer, biggest one I can supply, brought over the conduit, what we could put in there wire wise. So it gives us the capability moving forward that we'll be able to have up to 20 stations, tier 2, of course, 40 amps each. So which is really exciting. So we've left ourselves open, and the initial cost, of course, is all when you're all the digging, running conduits, that's all you kind of all that labor that goes into it. So upgrading for the bigger transformer, there was some money involved, but it wasn't the big part of the installation part of it. So, and now we got consumers up here, they're definitely using it. Our employees are using it daily, which is really exciting. And I every time I walk by there and see somebody charging it, it's a great feeling that you're doing something like this. And moving forward, like California, all the rules are coming up. It was important to us to be able to do that. And then with a beacon, visitors can also see that we're up here because we're kind of secluded up in the hills. Some people don't even know we're up here. So it's really great that they can now locate us too. And then they can, of course, averages, people usually here, average, our guests are here for about 2 hours, which they charge up for 2 hours. That gives them, approximately another, 46 miles to move on to their next location or get back home if need be. So, yeah, so, planning wise, just, it's really great to plan for future on the infrastructure. And, yeah, so that's, pretty much it for us, for me.
Great. Thanks, Juan. Great to hear that you're planning for the future and that you inspired some employees to get EVs. And
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And next, I think, 1 sec, sorry. We will pass it over to Matt Velasco, Director of Maintenance, Operations, and Transportation at Pittsburgh Unified School District.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me and to allow me to share my story about Pittsburgh Unified School District and our path to really taking the lead in the education sector with environmental stewardship. I've been the Director of Maintenance Operations Transportation here now for 5 years. When I first came to the district, we have a medium-sized bus fleet. We have 30 school buses currently. At the time when I first came, all of the school buses were an average of about 20 years old, and they were all of them were diesel. So, kind of quickly I realized that, we really needed to start working towards improving the infrastructure and our equipment that we were using if we really wanted to conform with the board's directive of being a green leader in the education arena. So I started looking around at what the technologies were, and electric buses were really just starting to emerge in the school district arena. There was a couple manufacturers that were working very diligently, and we purchased in 2017, we purchased our first 2 electric buses. They were the only ones at the time that were able to get certified by CHP to carry students. Since then, there's other manufacturers that have entered the arena, and there's a lot more options and opportunities for different brands of school buses. But since then, we've added 2 additional school buses, and we have 3 more on order that should be to the district by December of this year. I quickly learned that the infrastructure is something that you should really think about if you're planning out to do any large scale electrification of your fleet. Infrastructure is something you should really plan out first, because it doesn't really do you any good to have a beautiful zero emission school bus and nowhere to charge it. So I found some great partnerships that were out there. PG&E did a pilot program and contributed a little over $1 million of infrastructure improvements to our district, and added the switchgear and a new transformer, 7 chargers, and then some charge management hardware and software that tied in with our renewable farm that we have here. I have some solar panels and some electric wind turbines that power the maintenance yard where the buses are stored. So my advice is just, really look at the infrastructure. If you can, plan out a master plan of what that looks like. Always think of what you're going to be expanding to when you're doing that building. It is much more cost effective and efficient to dig once, because you're going to have to, trench the ground and, move those transformers into place. Also, you'll be working with your municipality to upgrade some of the switchgear and the transformer, more than likely to help to ensure that you have a safe amount of power to provide for those chargers. So I would invite anyone who is interested that's in the area or in the Bay Area to come out and kind of take a view of it firsthand. It was very challenging in the beginning to think that getting to where we're at now was possible. Luckily, we had some great partnerships, and we leveraged those partnerships to make it happen. But a lot of times when you're at the drawing board, it can be difficult to see or to actually just visualize what that looks like. So we're always open to have folks come out and visit, take a look at what we have in place currently. We're also working with MCE to provide some battery resiliency and backup at our school site. So lots of very, very cool things are happening here. So I'm always open to be a good resource to avoid some of those landmines that we stepped on as we went through the process, and to also show what can really happen and what is possible when you really put your mind to it and work with some strategic partnerships to bring the kind of the dream of a more green fleet to life. So I'll be in the breakout room if there's any specific questions for me regarding, how we went through the process. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And with that, we'll hear from our final speaker, Brett Wiley, EV Programs Manager with MCE.
Great, thanks, Sabrina. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Brett Wiley, and I manage all of our electric transportation initiatives at MCE, and also work with great colleagues and peers to realize those visions. So it's not a one-person show here. And thanks to Danae, Juan, and Matt for your work and your on-the-ground perspectives. All of them and those customers have participated in MCE's programs, which go beyond electric transportation. So if you're interested in any of MCE's programs, we will have a breakout room talking about those. And then you can also talk to your main MC representative if you want to learn more. So my presentation will focus in two parts. First, the EV market, and then give an overview of our programs, including one that we're announcing today. So when MCE started our electric transportation offerings in 2018, the bolded barriers were the top three barriers to EV adoption. And those are still persistent today to the overall market. And while some barriers are quite real, others can be perceived or viewed in different ways. Cost is one of them. The upfront cost of an EV compared to its gas equivalent is still more expensive, but EVs are typically less expensive when looking at the total cost of ownership. EVs have reduced maintenance and increased uptime, with some examples listed below. And one underlooked point is that there are only 20 parts in a full battery electric vehicle to get the car in motion, compared to over 2,000 parts with an internal combustion engine. So you can just sort of do the math there, far less parts to break down to keep your vehicles moving and running. And while this graph on the right is focused on residential fuel prices in general are drastically less expensive for electricity versus gas for commercial customers too. And I'll wrap up my presentation detailing that more specifically for commercial customers. So the EV market weathered the pandemic across California, with over 12% of all new vehicle sales in 2021 being EVs. That sales trend is counter to the same year-over-year growth of all light-duty vehicle sales in California. The same growth trend is seen in MCE's service area, which is representative of California's larger EV market. And our service area now has over 67,000 electric vehicles. And to put that into perspective, the state of Oregon only has roughly 45,000 EVs. So California is not only a rich EV market compared to others in the US, but our service area is representative of that rich EV market and adoption. So let's put where we're at now into context of overall market adoption. 15% ownership of a product typically signifies the movement from early adopters to the middle market. At that point, incentives will still be needed for some, but more infrastructure and lower costs at scale will make it attainable for most. 2021 new EV sales make it appear that we're close to that tipping point, but overall ownership at under 3% shows that we are far from it. So does 3% ownership of EVs matter? It does. It's, as it showed in the previous slides, there's a lot of growth in the market, and that growth is not stopping, especially with vans and trucks entering the market for the first time this year, electric vans and trucks. But to put it in perspective, the current EVs in MCE service area is equivalent to enrolling all residential customers in a city like Fairfield, which is enrolling this spring. When we reach that 15% of all our drivers in our service area having EVs, or all early adopters, that would be equivalent to increasing our residential customer accounts by 36% on a basis of electricity usage. But we still need to keep in mind and communicate effectively and design and offer programs for the 97% of drivers, including our commercial fleet drivers, in our service area that still use gas and diesel vehicles. Every new vehicle purchase stays on the road for 12 years, and transportation is California's largest source of sector-based emissions. So if we're going to meet our climate goals, not just at MCE, but for the state, we really need to start rapidly transitioning those drivers who are using gas and diesel. So what is MCE doing to help speed up the adoption curve? Our service area spans 37 communities, and with the upcoming enrollment of Fairfield residents and our commercial customers, the goal is to design programs to serve the wide variety of customers. When we started in 2010, we were just serving Marin County residents, and over the past 12 years, we've significantly expanded. And so there's lots of different types of folks that we need to serve. And as you'll see pretty soon, we're trying to meet those needs across the wide variety of electric transportation offers. So our EV charging program has been our longest running program for electric transportation, and very relevant since at least half of those who responded to our Zoom poll said that you want to install more EV chargers. Our program is available for workplaces, including fleets, multifamily properties, and long dwell sites like park and rides and ferry terminals. The program includes free technical assistance, funding for level 1 and level 2 ports, and layered incentives. If you're interested in more of the details of that program, feel free to join the breakout room and I can go into that, or we can schedule a call later on. We have a lot more current program and priorities that are listed here, and even more to come in fiscal year 22-23. One thing that I want to announce right now for the first time ever, so you get a little surprise, is a fleet electrification pilot that will kick off in March. So just in a couple weeks. This pilot will be in 2 phases. First, we'll want to directly hear from our municipalities, schools, transportation authorities, and small medium businesses about where you're at today and where you need to move forward in your transitioning your fleet to electric. This will be done with emailed surveys as well as virtual focus group conversations. Second, we'll take the findings from phase 1 and an additional market research to have a programming offer that complements and fills in the gaps to help you accelerate fleet electrification. So there's going to be a poll coming up right now. And if you're interested in this pilot, both phase 1 and then potentially in phase 2, please fill out the survey right now. Yeah, we'd love to have our customers involved, and you all are the first hearing about it. So looking forward to potentially having your participation. So I'm going to move along. You can keep filling out the poll as I keep talking. So some key stats in MCE's EV charging program, the one that I just mentioned. We've had over 900 level 2 ports installed in our program since we started in 2018. That's equivalent to 55% of all the public level 2 charging infrastructure in our service area. 69% of those chargers are powered by Deep Green. There's also a bonus for customers who are currently on Deep Green or who opt up to Deep Green, a financial incentive to do so, which is, we've seen a lot of that in this program. Now, the cost per port, our customers typically experience a cost per level 2 port of $6,500. This is their out-of-pocket cost before any incentives are included. And we really pride ourselves on having a program that is 3 times less expensive in general to participate in than the investor-owned utilities program. And this is why Sabrina mentioned at the top of the Zoom, MCE and other CCAs are really working to get that bill passed to allow CCAs to get the same kind of ratepayer funds to implement our electric transportation programs that the IOUs have. Our program, our EV charging program, also layers in services such as EV engagement, low carbon fuel standard, managed load, and demand response. I'll talk on EV engagement and LCFS just in a minute. So, really grounding the importance of some of these layered services, I'm going to do a brief case study on the LA Police Department's fleet electrification program, which started in 2016. So this offer was over $10 million investment. It had initial 100 BMW i3s with a plan to get 200 more, as well as over 100 level 2 charging stations and 4 DC fast charging stations. For those, Danae, Juan, and Matt, you know how expensive all that could be. And others on the call, you might realize that as well. LA is certainly not comparable to potentially your fleets, but what happened in this fleet electrification program, I think, is very relevant to any customer and their fleets. So what did happen? They rolled out this program, and in 3 years, the first 100 BMW i3s were barely used. Most of those i3s had less than 10,000 miles, and some of them had less than 1,000 miles. These were vehicles that replaced gas vehicles in the police department's fleet. And the most cited reason for lack of use was staff were concerned about range. They didn't want to drive the electric vehicle, so they tried to reserve and get one of the ICE vehicles that were still in their fleet. And this is why it's really important to engage your employees when you are transitioning your fleet, because as a reminder, 97% of all drivers are still driving gas vehicles. And those folks are not used to some of the changes, even if they're minor. Some of the changes can feel overwhelming for folks. And so the idea of reliability comes up a lot when people think about EVs, but those that have driven EVs for a long time know that that concern is more perceived than actualized. So we really, in our EV charging program and in your fleet programs, we really encourage you to really go heavy on employee engagement so that those EVs and the chargers get utilized. Another thing here is, right sizing or right purposing the fleet. These BMW i3s were only used for admin purposes, not parking enforcement. EVs are great for fixed route services, especially if range is a concern. So just some food for thought. Another thing, a layered service that we offer is participation in low carbon fuel standard. For those that are not familiar, low carbon fuel standard is a greenhouse gas transportation fuels market that the state of California runs. And you essentially get a credit that can be sold in the market for using less carbon intensive fuels, including 100% renewable electricity. When we compare the value of those low carbon fuel standard credits for electricity, 100% renewable electricity, for example, there's an estimate of essentially that credit translates to roughly 22 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, if you do the math, for a commercial customer on an A10B rate with MCE's deep green 100% renewable service, you're only paying 25 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you charge your electric vehicles and you're paying 25 cents per kilowatt hour, and you're claiming those LCFS credits at 22 cents per kilowatt hour, your remaining fuel costs are 3 cents per kilowatt hour. And I'll have the punchline there in one moment. But one thing that's really important, regardless of what fuel you're looking at for LCFS, is to make sure that your contracts read so that, especially for EV charging vendor contracts, most of them have a default term that the vendor can claim the credits from charging that you are doing. So make sure that you are reading those terms. In an MC's charging program, we pull out those terms up front for all of the qualified vendors so that when you select a vendor, you know where they stand and you can negotiate with them. But just make sure that you read those default terms, and if you want to claim those credits, you'll want to change those terms before you sign that contract. So here's for the punchline in cost of commercial fuels of electricity versus gas. So if you're using low carbon fuel standard credits to pay for and offset your electricity usage, you're paying less than 50 cents per gallon for transportation fuels. Now, even if you don't use low carbon fuel standard, you're still paying 253% more for gas compared to MCE's 100% renewable electricity. And sort of to put this into context, the last time that gas was below $2 a gallon consistently was 2004. So, electricity prices do change, typically 1 to 2 times a year. As we've seen more recently, gasoline and diesel prices change daily and are really prone to external events. And so not only from a price perspective, but from a volatility perspective, fleet electrification makes a lot of sense when you think about the total cost of operation and ownership of those vehicles. So thank you for your time. And now we are moving into breakout rooms. So I think you'll see some options coming up on your screen if you want to talk about local government and electric transport.
I think we might have lost Brett there. I think though Brett is correct, we are going to move into the breakout room portion. I think maybe somebody else could throw up that breakout room slide. Thank you, Dan. Just a reminder to the folks streaming on LinkedIn, the breakout room portion isn't going to be streamed. So we hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us and we'll get back to you. I want to send a really large welcome or thank you once again to our speakers, Danae, Juan, Matt, and Brett for taking time out of their busy days to share their expertise with us and be willing to answer any questions. As a reminder, we will be sending out this information, the PowerPoints later. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I'll let you get back to your days and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Power Hour. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Juan, you too.